Hello everyone, and very much welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Felicity Kelleher, the current chair of the Irish Academy of Management. And this is the latest in a series of partnered engagements between the Irish and British Academies of Management. We're thrilled to combine with our sister academy for this event.
Madeleine.
Right. Thank you, Felicity, and we are absolutely thrilled too. For those of you watching who don't know me and perhaps don't know BAM either, so I'm Madeleine Burrows. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Academy of Management. BAM was founded in 1986, has about 2,000 members, about 20% who, despite our name, are outside the UK. And we are a pluralistic community working across the whole field of management. Our journals are part of our drive to support and recognise rigorous high quality research, scholarship, learning and societal engagement. And the work of our editors is absolutely crucial in that, and we're terrifically grateful to all of them and their teams, not just for the work in curating and in getting out high quality research to the entire research community, but for the capacity building work they do like this too. So thank you very much to all of you. And thank you, Felicity, for starting this or getting this off the ground, because it's very much an IAM initiative, but it's another item in what is a long and very warm relationship with our colleagues in Ireland, and takes many forms, and absolutely delighted to be with you today. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappear from everybody's screens because I'm actually just popped out of another meeting. So, but I hope it all goes really well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thank you, Felicity. I hope everyone is doing well in these challenging times. It's great to see so many attendees from different parts of the world. Very briefly about myself, as I said, I'm Owen Babar. I'm co-editor-in-chief of British Journal of Management. I'm also a professor of International Human Resource Management at Aston Business School, Birmingham, UK. Thanks to both the academies for initiating this. I believe it's important we continue to push on the research agenda. I understand certainly we all were sucked into delivering learning and teaching related activities online and so on. But it also gives us an opportunity to keep pushing on the research and publication agenda. I'll briefly talk about two main things from British Journal of Management in my given 10 minutes or so. So first, I would like to share lots of overview background information about the journal. A lot of it is available online, but many a times we as researchers, we somehow don't go into those details. But that kind of information can be really useful for scholars submitting manuscripts to the journal. Second, I will share observations, and these observations are not only mine, but my co-editors and observations of associate editors and so on over the years regarding what kind of manuscripts get published in British Journal of Management, and what are the weaknesses and so on. In my observation, to an extent, some of this information is applicable to most of the other journals as well. Okay, to start with the first one, i.e. To give you an overview regarding the journal and the background information on the journal. As it says, it's the official journal of British Academy of Management, being published for 30 plus years. We started celebrating the 30th anniversary last year at Academy of Management in Boston, and then continued those celebrations at the BAM annual conference in last September in Aston at Aston. Okay. The kind of emphasis of British Journal of Management, we believe it's one of the very few genuinely general management journal, where we believe it's a very broad church kind of setup, where we tend to cover possible functions of management and disciplines related to that. So on one hand, we have finance, accounting, corporate governance, sustainability. On the other hand, we also have business history and so on, supply chain management, project management, and all the other kind of main disciplines. We tend to focus on publishing solid theoretical driven manuscripts, which are also empirically investigation based kind of research. We tend to focus on multidisciplinary nature of research and, if possible, interdisciplinary research as well. In a moment, I'll talk about my co-editor and also about our deputy editor. We have 11 associate editors and these many editorial board members. And we have our managing editor as Emma Messon, who tends to be your first, majority of the times, first point of contact when you are submitting a manuscript to British Journal of Management. So on the left-hand side, it's me, and you can see from the video as well. Doug Cumming is my co-editor-in-chief. He is based at Florida, and I'm pleased Doug is with us today. Shlomo is the incoming editor. At the moment, he's acting as a deputy editor-in-chief, but from January 2021, when I'll finish my kind of extended term of 7 years in December 2020, he comes in and joins Doug as co-editor-in-chief. So these two colleagues are there, and they'll be joining me to take and address a number of questions you guys might have later on. When we look at our associate editors, we believe it's highly diverse. And as I was saying, this is very kind of true general management journal. And you can see our associate editors, which I must say, it's a dream team to work with. So I'll point out one or two things from this slide. So what we did last year, we realized that perhaps we need 2 specialist associate editors in methods. So if you look at profile of Anne Cunliffe, she is highly reputed in qualitative analysis. And then we have Jeremy Dawson, who kind of specializes and an expert in quantitative methodologies. And I'll come back to this, why we need this. But we also have an associate editor, George Fryness. He deals with all our communications related kind of activities. Okay. When you are submitting manuscripts, if you look at the associate editor's team, most likely you might be able to judge who might be handling your manuscript. So I'll stop it there, but the associate editors are based in different parts of the world and they specialize in different areas.
Can I ask you, I'm just looking at the feed here, can I ask you to display this in slideshow format, please?
Thank you, I'm still learning. Really appreciate it. And if others can't hear, then please write a text or something. Okay, so we are looking for 3 kind of contributions, maybe a bit more than that, but this is linked with the kind of submissions we are looking for. Okay, so we are certainly looking for original papers, as I said, theoretically driven and based in solid empirical investigations. We are also looking for our regular special issues, which we tend to have 1. Every year, we sent out the call for proposals in November, and based on that, we make a decision. At times, what we have done, if we find more than one kind of wow special issue proposal, then we have created a combination of small mini issues. So right now we have 3 mini issues going on, which will form one special issue. Or we had, I think so very rarely and fortunately, we'll have some kind of unexpected events where we lose some remarkable scholar. And Mike Wright is the one I'm talking about, whom we lost earlier this year. So in his kind of memory, we are doing a special issue which compiles work related to his work. We also have this third kind of area where we are open for methodology related submissions. I'll briefly talk about these 3. So like most journals, when we talk about theory papers, we are looking for novel contributions. And believing a majority of the participants have a PhD or are pursuing a PhD, I believe these things are pretty clear what we are looking for. I've given some references if you guys are interested in looking into what kind of stuff, perhaps how to refer and use and so on. Empirical papers, majority of the empirical papers, they are based in primary data, but of course we have panel data and so on. Here are some suggestions when we are looking at submissions based on secondary and primary data. So as scholars, please keep in mind some of the things which are on this slide. So please be transparent, please be open, please try to share your data from where it is coming, when it was collected, who all participated, any ethical issues, and so on. So we are pushing for that kind of transparency and understanding from where the data is coming and if it's representative of the population and so on. Further, these I call the basic fundamentals, but our observation suggests many a times the fundamentals are not in place and it doesn't look professional and it doesn't look really nice. And for quality journals, some of these things have to be in place. Okay, so when you are putting tables or when you are reporting significance and so on. So these things should be there. And similarly, when we are reporting different findings and results, there are norms and there are ways of reporting those. So generally we are okay with the statistical significance, but many a times we ignore the economic significance if it is relevant for your piece of work and so on. Methodology Corner is pretty unique to British Journal of Management, where we are very much interested in inviting and having submissions. So far, you guys are able to challenge and find out kind of drawbacks in some existing methodologies and are able to propose something along the lines how you take things forward in that given kind of area of methodology. So I've put 3 kind of examples which have been published in the recent past, and you can use the link and find out more. And there was a question related to Methodology Corner earlier posed by one of the attendees in advance to the meeting today. So the question was, can we give feedback on proposals related to Methodology Corner? And the answer is yes. So write to either Doug or me or both of us, and we'll look into it and we'll come back to you. This is typical kind of information which is relevant for most journals. So here are different stats related to the kind of submissions we receive, our acceptance rate, desk reject, and so on. We try hard to desk reject a lot because we believe it's beneficial for everyone. If you get the bad news in 2-3 days instead of 1 year, that is far better. But the whole idea is to go for quality and be supportive and constructive. So we'll give you clear information why a paper is desk rejected or indeed desk rejected also by a given associate editor. This we have put so that junior faculty or junior scholars, they can see the journey generally a given manuscript takes. Okay, so as I said, earlier, managing editor is your first call. Majority of the journals, they are inviting submissions on Manuscript Central. So once they are submitted, the managing editor briefly looks at them, and she randomly allocates one manuscript to me and one to Doug. And we try to make an initial decision in the first very few days, 2-3 days, or at times straight away that day only. And we do handle some manuscripts to find a balance of load with our associate editors. Otherwise, we allocate it to them. Later on, what happens depends a lot how quickly we are able to find reviewers. We try to get 3 reviewers. At times, it takes much longer to find these 3 reviewers, but we aspire, and I believe 95% of the cases we manage to get them. Last couple of slides before I hand it over to Dermot to talk about International Journal of Management reviews. Why papers get rejected? Okay? And this is based on our observations of the last few years. Okay, so regularly we'll find one or a combination of these reasons why a manuscript is rejected. And again, most of these are self-explanatory, but 1 or 2 of these, for example, BJM generally don't tend to publish manuscripts with a very narrow focus. For example, research can be impact of COVID-19 on operations of school in the UK, a case study of primary school in Sutton Coldfield, which is in Birmingham. So the focus would be, primary investigation would be so narrow, where we are looking for much broader focus where possible. The methodological kind of weak or description, many a times we start research with established methodological weaknesses. For example, we know linkages between certain variables can't be robustly explained on the basis of cross-sectional design and so on. And still we'll come across lots of submissions where scholars have pursued that and are trying to defend that it's a robust piece of research and so on. What constitutes a publishable paper? The first point is really important. All of them are important, but certainly we are looking at all aspects, whether the research pursued is timely, whether the topic is really interesting, whether the research problem is well developed, whether the theorizing is to the extent the way we would like to see, whether the right kind of methods have been adopted and utilized, and the last bit, which is equally important, the useful contributions a particular submission is making. Okay. Fit with the journal, I think so we understand this, addressing the fundamental questions of why, how, and so on. The last point, I will just say a few sentences where historically it was acceptable if you are doing your research in a less or under-researched part of the world and simply saying this research has not been done in Nigeria or Ghana, hence it's really useful. At the moment, we have advanced, and that kind of explanation is a starting point, but it's not good enough. So it's important you contextualize your research properly using the right kind of theories, and then moving into the research context, if the example was Ghana or Nigeria, specific sector, and go much deeper and establish your research in that kind of field. So I'll stop here. I think so I've taken more than 10 minutes. So I'd like to thank everyone who has been supporting the journal so far. And we are always looking for reviewers and editorial board members. And if you feel you are suitable, then write to us. So I'll stop here, and later on, along with Doug and Shlomo, I'll be happy to take questions. So I will stop sharing this, and I will invite Dermot to make his brief presentation. Over to Dermot.
Okay, thank you, Pawan, and thank you, Felicity and colleagues, for organizing this. So I'll just give a brief presentation of IJMR. I'll just share a screen. Okay, so IGMR was 20 years old last year. It's one of the other one of the journals that's run by the British Academy of Management and jointly owned with Wiley Publishing. We are a journal that deals only in literature reviews in business and management. We publish about 4 issues a year. Our current impact factor, 2-year impact factor, is 7.6, and that's been increasing steadily over the last 10 years. And our 5-year impact factor is over 10. And this puts us in ranked 8th of the business and management journals globally. You can see on this figure as well that our downloads have been steadily increasing alongside our impact factor. And last year we had over 500,000 downloads globally. So as I said, I'm one of the co-editors-in-chief. The other co-editor-in-chief is Katie Bailey. And we have a consulting editor-in-chief, Caroline Gatrell. So Caroline was co-editor-in-chief for the previous 6 years. So the aims and scopes of the journal, the number one aim of IGMR is to produce literature reviews. So those are, well-informed, thorough, critical reviews of a particular domain within management and organization and management studies. So the key thing that we're looking for, 2 key things we're looking for in IGMR is, first, we want the literature review to be up to date and thorough. And the second thing is our literature reviews published need to make a clear, significant conceptual contribution or contribution to theory within a particular field. And I'll talk about that later. So really the idea of IGMR is that our papers will not only look backwards in terms of reviewing a field, but look forward in terms of setting out new paths or, new strategic platforms from which to sort of launch new paths and directions in research. So our reviews are not just descriptive reviews, they're very much theory development reviews. And we see them as an important part in the overall development of theory within the field, the wider field. So what makes IGMR distinctive? There aren't that many journals and organizations and management studies that publish literature reviews. We've got the Academy of Management Annals, we've got Journal of Management that does, specials on literature reviews. JMS has started to do literature reviews. IGMR has been doing it for 20 years. So this is the only thing that we do. It's what we specialize in. We don't specialize in any particular domain or discipline. So we publish reviews right the way across the board, from marketing and finance, right the way through to organizational behavior. Most importantly, and what makes our reviews distinctive is, as I've said, all our reviews make some sort of contribution to theory. And, that could be, gap spotting approaches where you identify a gap in the literature and try and develop some sort of theoretical solution to that gap. Or it could be much more, much more bold and adventurous in terms of what the author's trying to do. So we don't set a particular limit on the style or the type of contribution that we're looking for, as long as it has a contribution to theory. And increasingly, as we've outlined in the last 2 editorials, we're looking for papers that are interdisciplinary. So the problems that, organization and management scholars are facing are increasingly interdisciplinary. The challenges that we face as a society aren't just confined to one domain. So we've definitely encouraged literature reviews that move between domains and seek to sort of make bridges and blend theories between different domains. So really we are a very general journal, and we'll accept and at least consider anything, no matter how radical the authors may think that is. So very similar to what Powen said with British Journal of Management, we have the same managing editor, Emma Nissen. We use the same Scholar One system. We don't have as many submissions as British Journal of Management. We have about 1 a day, so around 360, 370 submissions a year. We do desk reject much more of these, so we desk reject about 80%. Our reviews tend to be quite lengthy, and we do involve 3 experts in every single peer review process. So we really want to make sure that when a paper goes into peer review, we're optimizing the chances that it will actually get through that peer review process with a successful outcome. Our overall acceptance rate is 5%, but as I said, most of that happens at the front end with Katie and myself desk rejecting papers. With every desk reject letter, we'll always give an indication of what was missing in the paper, and this will always be linked back to our publication criteria, which is on the website. Our journal has also become increasingly international. So it started in 1999 to largely a UK audience, but now our submissions are, just under a half are right across Europe. In fact, if you look at any of our recent publications, you'll see that most of the authors are from, about half of those authors are from within, different types of countries and institutions across Europe. But we have an increasing number of submissions from Asia. About a third of our submissions are now from Asia, about 10% from North America, and then the rest from Africa and Australia and South America. So our distribution and our readership is increasingly international in focus. So the publication criteria, so you'll find all these details on our website. As I said, we're a generalist journal, and you can do a literature review on any topic within that. But the things that we're looking for is the first sort of thing is the literature itself mature enough to warrant a review? So this doesn't necessarily exclude emerging topics, but if you're developing theory in an emerging topic, it's likely that you're going to have to draw on literature outside that topic as well. So to focus the review just on a very small selection of papers is very unlikely to get through, get put into the peer review process. We're looking for the reviews to be differentiated in some ways. So we don't want reviews that are, direct extensions or copies of reviews that have been done in other journals or in IGMR. We're looking for the reviews to be up to date, to be a sort of authoritative, assessment of what's happening in a particular field, because ultimately we will choose experts within that field to act as reviewers for the paper. And the review shouldn't be descriptive, it should be critical. It should be, a critical assessment of the development of the literature. And another thing that we sometimes see with submissions is authors sometimes unnecessarily restrict the time period over which the review is completed. And again, we're looking for well-reasoned arguments as to why you've included a particular literature, and what are the theoretical grounds for justifying that. And finally, the key thing for us is that the review has to be saying something new. It has to be shedding new light on a particular literature, putting forward a new framework, new perspective, new ideas, new insights. Without that, it won't go out for peer review. So we won't send a paper out for peer review unless we see a very clear potential that the paper could make a strong and novel conceptual contribution. There are other things that we, unlike maybe other journals that publish literature reviews, are looking for. We ask for a methodology. So this doesn't have to be, not all reviews have to follow, let's say, the systematic literature review approach of, Tranfield and Denyer or whatever. What we're basically looking for here is that you outline why you've included certain parts of the literature, what the justification for that is, and why you've included those literatures and how that's developed your thinking. We encourage reviews that are narrative in their approach and that assess the development of the field and the different aspects of a particular field. We don't necessarily exclude the more quantitative number crunching type bibliometric papers, but it's important that if those are the types of reviews that you submit, you also include a very strong narrative and development of theory from that. And this is something that's very often lacking with those papers. So the don'ts are, we have a lot of authors that really don't read the journal submission guidelines or publication criteria. We do get a lot of empirical papers sent to us, even though we only publish literature reviews. So, every week I have to desk reject papers because they're empirical. So again, because people haven't read the publication criteria. A paper might be desk rejected as well if the field isn't mature enough or, poorly defined. I would say the number one reason is because there's an unclear contribution. In other words, the literature review is descriptive in its nature and it's not putting forward anything new, any sort of new ideas or new insights. There are lots of other reasons, you know, to do with, for example, the literature being too broad, fighting too many battles on too many fronts. You know, these are common to any sort of journal, really. And, you know, there are other issues then to do with the presentation and writing style. Again, these would be common to other journals. So those are the key contacts that we have. There are two things I'd just like to say at the end. We have two calls for special issues that are going to be, the deadline for these is February next year. So the first of these is a special issue on grand societal challenges. And the second is a special issue on problematizing theory and globalization. So you'll find details of both of those on our website. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I'll just stop that there.
Thank you, Dermot. Can I request colleagues from Irish Journal of Management, Michelle, Jonathan, to make your presentation, please?
Yep, thanks very much. I'm going to start off the presentation. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so thanks very much for giving us this opportunity to present on the Irish Journal of Management. My name is Jonathan Lavelle. I'm at the Kenny Business School of the University of Limerick. So I'm going to start off the presentation with just some general information and background information on the journal. And then my colleague, Michelle O'Sullivan, will also talk about submissions and some ideas around quality submissions. So the Irish Journal of Management is the journal of the Irish Academy of Management. It's got a long history tradition. It was established in 1978, so it's over 40 years in existence. And it's the premier kind of outlet for management research in Ireland and also internationally. So it's just some general information about the journal. So the Irish Journal of Management is an open access journal published by the publishing house De Gruyter. I suppose it's good to outline that it's a society pay model, so it's just to distinguish it from other open access journals where the author pays, there's no author fees. It's a society pay model that we operate with the journal. And the aim of the Irish Journal of Management is to publish well-written and well-researched articles that contribute to our understanding of management-related issues, both in Ireland and also internationally. So we publish articles or submissions across the traditional management disciplines and also encouraging interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary submissions also. The journal is also listed and featured on some of the well-known reputable international journal listings, including the ABS and the Australian Business Deans Council quality list also. In terms of the structure of the journal, there's two co-editors. There's myself and my colleague Michelle O'Sullivan. We also then have an editorial board with 40 members. Have them all listed there. 40 members in total, half of which are international, coming from a wide range of countries, about seven different countries. Irish Journal of Management also offers the following services as well in terms of abstracting and indexing. Again, you'd be familiar with many of these. So in terms of what types of submissions we welcome at the Irish Journal of Management, we welcome kind of empirical research-based papers, adopting both quantitative and qualitative research approaches. We encourage systematic literature reviews, submissions related to teaching and learning, conceptual papers and critiques, practitioner insights, eminent scholar insight articles, and this is a new one that we've just introduced and we'll be publishing this year, where we invite an eminent scholar to produce an insight into one of their areas of specialism or areas of expertise. We also publish book reviews, and on occasions we also publish special issues as well. In terms of submissions, as I mentioned, we attract a wide range of submissions across the general management field. We receive submissions from doctoral students the whole way up to early career researchers, all the way up to distinguished and eminent scholars. About 40% of our submissions would be international. So our submission process is very similar. It's an online submission process. We use Editorial Manager, which is a similar online platform to other journals. Again, the journey is very similar to what has been previously described by the other two journals, in that the papers come in, both myself and Michelle share the reviewing of the papers, and if suitable, we send them out for review. We operate a double-blind review process at the Irish Journal Management. And again, the objective really is that the reviewing process is as developmental as much as we can. Our acceptance rate is somewhere around 40%. Average time for submission to decision, if there's just one round of reviews, is around 5 months. And once your article is submitted, we do have the facility to publish the article ahead of print. So now I'll hand over to my colleague Michelle, who will talk about submissions.
Thanks, Jonathan. One of the questions that was in the Q&A earlier was about the types of topics that we're interested in. And as Jonathan mentioned, we have a wide remit in terms of our interest across all management disciplines. And it's also worth looking as well at the themes of our conference. So our Irish Academy Management Conference, which is on in late August, early September usually. This year's in Dublin City University, and its theme is management and responsibility, and management for a responsible future. So it's worth looking at the IAM conference themes for topics that would be of interest to us. In terms of, what's a good submission, I mean, a lot of the things that I'll talk about here are overlapping with our colleagues' comments from earlier on about things like the basics. And, the basics in terms of proofreading and grammar and so on won't discount somebody or get rejected, but it certainly frustrates a reviewer in terms of reviewing papers if the basics aren't done well, like anonymizing, good referencing, up-to-date referencing, and particularly that there aren't glaring omissions. And if there are similar topics, or for example, if someone has done an investigation of a similar topic in your field, in your country, that they are not omitted, and that you engage with what those people have done and engage with, well, what makes your topic different. The basics in terms of what our colleagues mentioned earlier as well have been a fit for the journal. And one of the difficulties we've had with some of the papers is that they have some relationship to a business topic, but they are not explicit as to the relevance of it to management. So for example, we might have papers which are submitted on consumer retailing, but each paper has to reflect back on what does this mean for the management discipline and the practice of management, and not just be about an aspect of business without referring back to management. The importance of following submission guidelines is important. Papers will be sent back to people if they don't follow submission guidelines, like with regard to word count and so on. Overall, we're looking for, as with any journal, is a coherent, well-written paper. That's, I suppose, the most difficult papers to write are always the ones that are easiest to read, that they're easy to follow, that the reviewer is not having to struggle about what the topic is about, what the research questions are about, and so on. So it should be a well-written, coherent paper that systematically tries to answer a distinct and explicit research question and puts a lot of thought into how that could be answered. So moving on then to the next slide on article development. In terms of the introduction, I think one of the biggest reasons why articles are rejected stems from the introduction, that it's just not clear what the paper is explicitly trying to do. There's a general idea as to the topic, but there must be some explicit research questions, an identification of a problem or research gap in literature. And as colleagues mentioned earlier, that there should be some context. So if you are writing on a particular issue that's specific in your country, what's the relevance of that issue for the wider management global community, and how might it be investigated in your own particular country? In terms of the literature, I suppose the biggest issue of the literature are often superficial literature reviews. that don't really engage or analyze deeply the literature that's out there, and in particular analyzing whatever conceptual frameworks are particularly relevant for your topic. So it's quite important that there isn't a light touch literature review, that it is quite analytical, that it seems that it has been well thought through, and that people have investigated whether or not literature already exists in your particular research question and what yours is contributing that other literature is not. In terms of methodology, I suppose the biggest issue for the methodology is always, as others have mentioned previously, that there's just not enough detail given. So what we want to see is that the authors have thought through the methodology in a very systematic, thorough fashion. So as much detail as possible in terms of how interviewees are sourced. If you sent surveys, how did you get those back? Did that have any implications for bias? For example, if they were sent through company management and so forth. So really significant explanation of the methodology to give confidence to reviewers that the paper and the study was done very, very thoroughly. Moving on into some of the final sections of articles, of course, the findings, and I suppose the biggest thing about the findings is that they must have a clear line of thought from the introduction, the literature review. So, you know, academic papers are not imaginative essays in the sense that nothing should be really a surprise to a reviewer or a reader. So if there's a whole bunch of findings which come completely out of the blue or a surprise to the reader and have not been embedded in the conceptual framework or in the literature review or in the specific research questions, then that's problematic. So there should be a coherent line of thought from beginning to end. And if you do have additional findings, we all have lots of interesting findings from our studies, but you do have to be quite thoughtful as to the ones that need to be included, and only include the findings that are specific to the research questions, as opposed to findings which might be just interesting, but not necessarily specific to the objectives of the paper. And lastly then, I suppose in terms of conclusion, and this all seems quite basic, but yet, you know, there are things that have to be reiterated in terms of having conclusions which are grounded in the findings. And many journals now, including our own, very much welcome talking about the implications for management and for society sometimes, depending on your topic, of your particular investigation. And I would say to engage with that line of thought very carefully and not to stray too far from your findings. Sometimes there's a tendency for people to move off into areas which are quite different to the topic. So stick quite closely to it. I suppose overall, as for with any journal submission, what I'd say is, you know, make sure that your article is read by someone who's not one of the authors before you submit it. And that can be very difficult because people are time poor, but do engage in the networks around you to try and get their views before it is sent in for a journal submission. And then finally, then in terms of our journal website, and just for ease of reference, we've included the website link to the editorial manager where the articles are submitted. If anyone has any questions on potential articles, if they feel it might be a good fit or not for the journal, please feel free to email myself or Jonathan, and our email addresses are also available on the Irish Academy website. So thank you very much and best of luck to everybody.
In terms of the process, could I just suggest that we ask Douglas and Shlomo to briefly introduce themselves as the two editors of BJM who haven't spoken yet?
Sure, I could go first if that's okay, Shlomo. Greetings from Florida. I am Douglas Cumming. I have been a BJM editor since January 2020. Before that, I served as a number of years as an associate editor of BJM. Very happy to work with Pawan, Jeff, Shlomo, and the whole editorial team. It's a great group of folks to work with. My areas of research are very wide, I guess you could say. A little bit of a jack of all trades type of person. So my home department is in finance, although I regularly publish in topics on entrepreneurship, international business, even have papers ranging into human resource management and general management topics, strategy. So you know, with our process at BJM, the papers are largely directed towards people who are specialists in certain topic areas. So when a paper comes into BJM, we handle it the same day that it's received. If it's a paper that's directly on something that I've worked on and have some expertise in that area, then I'll likely handle it myself. If not, I'll go to one of the specific editors and assign the paper to that person who has more topic expertise than I do. So having said that, again, it's really great to have such a strong supportive team. Also great to be affiliated with BAM and the partner journals. So we're much in debt to everybody. And I don't want to talk too long, so let me please pass it over to Shlomo, and I'm going to mute my microphone now. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. My name is Professor Shlomo Tarba. I'm a chair in strategy and international business in the University of Birmingham and currently a deputy editor-in-chief. And from January next year, I will join Doug as a co-editor. Before joining the British Journal of Management, I have served as a guest editor in special issues in both scholarly classic, I would say, and also executive-oriented journals like California Management Review, Academy of Management Perspectives, Journal of Organizational Behavior. And that quite reflects the versatility of my personal research agenda, because I'm working on mergers and acquisitions, strategic agility, organizational ambidexterity, resilience, and other very interesting topics. By the way, originally I'm a virologist. Given the current situation, it's very interesting. But over the years, I diversified into business strategy and then gradually into organizational behavior, human resource management, and so on. I don't want to be repetitive and refer to the same things already highlighted by Pawan and Doug, but maybe one particular point in relation to the novelty of manuscripts that we are looking at BGM. Sometimes I'm receiving papers to handle, and the novelty and added value is not properly articulated by submitting authors. Moreover, sometimes the submitting authors, they are not joining the ongoing discussion, ongoing debate on a particular topic in BGM. And that is one of the points that I would suggest to the prospective authors to address. Always to check what is going on in a target journal in terms of the topic. What is the discussion? Because that will help them to bring about the stronger added value. Thank you very much.
Okay. George and Felicity are compiling the questions which are coming. Number of you are simultaneously addressing some of the queries and questions via the chat box and Q&A box as well. So I have a list of questions which have been forwarded to me by Felicity. So if we can go around and make brief comments on your understanding of these questions. Some of them are pretty straightforward. Perhaps I can address it for everyone. To start with, how can I become a peer reviewer? And my suggestion on this is write to the managing editor of a given journal with providing your brief profile, and most likely they should be able to put you as one of the reviewers on their reviewer list. How can I enter my reviewing interests? So within your profile, most likely you guys provide your research specialism or emerging specialism in the form of keywords and so on. And based on that, again, hopefully in due course, you guys would be receiving manuscripts to review. So first question on which I would request my co-panelists to comment. What are the current topics of great interest to your journal? Okay, who wants to go first, please?
Okay, I could jump in, seeing as how no one else is jumping in. So, you know, it's hard as editors to suggest topics that you should write on. You know, in general, you should write on things that people haven't done before. So you don't want to write a quote unquote me too paper. So an example of a paper that typically fails is one that replicates a study that's done in a different country and say, well, you know, and then adding the country name in the title where you replicate someone else's study and then you do it in, I don't know, I'm Canadian, so I'll pick on Canada and say, you know, such and such study in Canada, you know, and the question is, who cares, right? So you don't want to do some sort of me too paper. The other thing, just to highlight, and I'll be brief, is it's tough to, you know, get excited about papers that have blindingly obvious results. So one way I like to put this is that you could write a paper that says, dog bites man. Well, of course, dog bites man. I mean, we all know that. But why not sell a paper that says, man bites dog? You know, and that's much more exciting. You know, something that we didn't expect. And to put it a little more formally, you could, you know, have a paper that moves your prior a little bit. So you might have some sort of prior belief, and now we read something that informs us in a way that we didn't think about before. So how have you shaped other people's thinking on a topic? And if you can, you know, convey that message, that other people will get excited about your work, and they're going to be more likely to reference it, and that will, you know, build up the scholarship, make you an expert on the topic area. Then once you become an expert, then, you know, of course, you'll be invited to be a reviewer, editorial board member, etc.
Thank you, Doug. Jonathan, Michelle?
Thank you. Yes, well, as mentioned earlier, we'd be interested in articles that speak to our conference theme. But other than that, I would agree with Douglas. We don't have any strict boundaries. And because the management discipline is so wide, you know, we've had articles in technology management and retailing and so on that we welcome with any area of new interest. I totally would agree with Douglas about the idea of replicating papers just by country. That is an issue. And we do spend quite a bit of time at the desk review stage, ensuring that our papers appear to have at least some unique contribution and are not just replicating templates from other countries.
Okay. How about you, Dermot?
Yeah, so what do we find interesting? Well, we find interesting topics interesting, as a you know, so we don't have any specific preference for topics, and we would kind of avoid the sort of some of the gap spotting approaches that early career researchers are sort of advised to follow, which I wouldn't suggest you follow, because sometimes gap spotting research, the question we would ask back at you then is, well, why is it important to fill that gap? I think the key question in any topic is, why is it interesting and why is it important to address that topic? You know, is it important for the domain you're specifically interested in, for example, strategy as practice or something like that? Is it interesting for the wider audience? Remember, IGMR is a generalist audience, so all our papers need to be appealing both to specialists and to the wider audience. And that's not just an academic audience. We, you know, if one of our, in fact, both of our special issues, our calls for special issues at the minute, are on wider societal challenges. So, you know, if you can identify an emerging topic that addresses an emerging societal problem that's going to, you know, lead to, you know, significant problems for organizations, then that also would be an interesting topic. You know, so like, you know, like the others have said, it's we don't specialize. We're a generalist journal. We don't specialize or recommend or, you know, suggest that there's some sort of hot topic, because there isn't.
Thank you. I'll build on what Shlomo was saying. So I see it from two angles. First one is the traditional route of going through this incremental approach where something has been done and we keep adding new aspects or variables or constructs to it. That's the way we have been trained, find gaps and empirically conduct more research and provide support and so on and take the field forward incrementally. Or right now, and we have a question related to that as well. Now and then we have these major events which happen around us. They can be economic crisis, or they can be things like Brexit, or they can be things like COVID-19. Okay, so most journals are open. Going back to it's really timely, the implications are just phenomenal. The kind of usefulness for different stakeholders is again very broad. So here we are talking about 3 general journal management journals, and all these journals certainly would be interested in that as well. I'll say, like an economist, so far the other things remain in place, i.e. The quality is there, i.e. the right kind of methodology is there, i.e. the right kind of theory has been utilized, and so on. So certainly, to sum up response to this question, unless Shlomo wants to add something more to this, so we can have that incremental approach of finding the current kind of topics via developing niche areas in the form of gaps and so on, and then conducting research, or going back to these major events which happen. So right now, majority of the, not majority, many of the big journals, JAP and journals in international business area and so on, they are interested in having manuscripts related to the impact of coronavirus on different stakeholders, employees' well-being and so on. So that's the way I will look into this. Okay. So the other question which is posed here is, how do you increase the opportunity to publish in these journals? And I'll briefly summarize this unless someone wants to add to this. All the editors have already highlighted the do's and don'ts and the way to structure and the way to present and the way to build a case for your research. I'll also add it will be useful to read a lot from the target journal, not necessarily these 3 journals, but any journal you are aiming to publish. So read a lot from that kind of journal, the way things are done. At times you'll be able to pick up an established kind of template. That doesn't mean you have to seriously follow it, but that will give you an idea, especially if you are less experienced scholar, how to develop the manuscript and so on. But overall, I think so far the quality requirements are met. So far, the kind of research phenomenon you want to examine and find the linkages, if you are finding linkages between different variables and so on, and you have the right kind of theory and methods to robustly examine that and highlight your contributions. So that I'll say will certainly enhance the possibility of publishing in these journals. Over to you guys if you want to add something more to this.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, a key thing in improving your chances of getting published is to get your peers, just as Oliver was saying, just to get your peers to read the papers beforehand. You know, go to conferences sometimes will have limited value if you don't have, you know, if you're not developing a network of people that will look at your papers and give you feedback. Mm-hmm. But, you know, most of us work, you know, with other people, and I know that time is precious, but, you know, that is the best way of improving the way you write, is to get other people to look at your paper and to give you feedback that isn't flavored in any way, you know, to give you the feedback in the same way that an editor might give you feedback. You know, you can also get feedback through the peer review process, and, you know, it's a free process. And if you can get the paper out for peer review, you'll get excellent feedback back from reviewers. But clearly you need to start to learn to get over the desk reject hurdle in order to start access. that feedback. So, you know, feedback is the best way to improve the way you write, and also reviewing papers is a very good way to improve the way you write, because you can start to put a reviewer's head on. So, you know, I would recommend both those.
Thank you, Dermot. And that's really useful for junior faculty who have less experience, because many a times we just rush through things, and we submit a manuscript which is underprepared. So getting feedback, spending enough time, and ensuring it's the best you can develop, and you have improved it a few times and so on, then submit it. Okay. The other question we have here is, do these journals have a preference in terms of method? And I responded to the text box saying, no, we don't have any preference for this. So far, you are utilizing the appropriate and most relevant kind of methodology to address your research phenomenon. That's my take on this. Anyone else want to add to this?
No, we'll have no preferences. We accept qualitative and quantitative. As long as they're well explained, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, historically, people had this notion, and perhaps to some extent it was correct, that some of the well-established North America-based kind of journals, they were more oriented towards quantitative analysis and those kinds of methodologies. But that has also changed over the years. And all journals, more or less, are open to possible kind of methodologies. So far, they make sense. And as I said, so far, they help you to kind of address your research aim adequately and in a robust manner. The other kind of question we have, do you accept abductive approach-based kind of papers? Okay. Anyone wants to go for this? Okay, abductive kind of approach is generally picked up by this new journal from Academy of Management, which is Academy of Management Discoveries, where they are talking about, they are mainly interested in publishing manuscripts where you don't have sufficient theory to explain a particular research phenomenon. So you are pursuing kind of a bit of action research as well, where you are combining both inductive and deductive kind of methodology. And that's the term, my understanding of abductive approach. So again, for PJM, we tend to primarily look for solid established theory, which is able to explain your research phenomenon, and accordingly the relevant kind of methodology and so on. But certainly, if we find something really exciting and we say, hang on, yeah, this kind of research phenomenon is worth considering by an abductive approach, that would be my take. Doug?
Yeah, definitely agree. You know, again, it goes back to some of the things that we already discussed, that sometimes these things can inform us and excite us. So I certainly wouldn't see necessarily a limitation with that abductive approach.
Yeah. Okay. The other question is it not unrealistic to expect an upsurge of the COVID-related submissions? Will these be given a priority? How the content of individual issues will be balanced under the circumstances? I think so we can agree, we will expect a number of submissions in coming months, perhaps not in coming week or so, but in coming months, we can expect more submissions related to COVID. And kind of priorities, yeah, if they are timely and if they can be helpful and if they help to take the field forward, and if they can create really useful learning, Again, the kind of themes these papers might be examining in a moment, Shlomo, then certainly journals would be really interested. We can see if you are part of different listservs, for example, of Academy of Management, on a regular basis, we are receiving to help participate in different surveys. So I'm aware a number of scholars, I'm myself involved in a couple of projects related to impact of COVID-19 on well-being and impact on policy and so on. So certainly as an editor, I can expect we'll have more submissions, and certainly so far the basic fundamentals I was indicating earlier, and my panel colleagues were indicating earlier, that it's timely, it's meaningful, it's exciting, it will help to take the field forward and so on. Yes, we would be very much interested in that. Before I allow others to speak, will this be given a priority? We will treat it more or less like other submissions and take it through the regular kind of journey. Of course, until unless we invite submissions, for example, we badly consider that we should do some sections in a way, PJM is thinking of doing that, then perhaps some kind of priority of how quickly we can publish that kind of information. Otherwise, it might be dated, it might not be of use, and so on. So those kinds of judgments are to be made as and when we come across those kinds of situations. Shlomo, you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Paul. Just a short addition to things highlighted by you. In relation to the COVID crisis, I personally believe that the very fact that a submission deals with the crisis, it doesn't bring automatically any uniqueness or novelty. The question is how COVID, as any other crisis, presents a context for stronger contribution. For example, in Academy of Management website, there is one particular paper that was recently published by Kemal Melahi and other colleagues. And it talks about specific, unique features of strategic alliances that are established in order to deal successfully with this type of crisis. So if there is something unique, then maybe it can be considered, but not the very fact that the paper, it deals with this particular crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shlomo. Someone else wants to comment on this?
Yes, I think we would agree at the Irish Journal of Management as well. I think we'd agree with the previous comments that we would certainly welcome submissions in relation to this topic. But again, that doesn't automatically mean that they will they must meet the standard criteria that we've talked about already. So yeah, and again, the critical thing is about outlining the key contribution or key arguments or key debates that you're addressing in relation to that overall topic. But yeah, we'd certainly be interested in those submissions, but yeah, again, the usual criteria apply.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so the other question we have, how in principle the journals deal with the ever-growing number of submissions? Dermot, do you want to go first? Your numbers are continuously increasing.
Yeah, well, you know, talking about COVID-19, our submissions have been increasing dramatically since the crisis started. And year on year, we have had an increase. You know, what we do is we take on more associate editors. So at IGMR, we're in the process of increasing our editorial team, our associate editor team. And it does increase the workload on editors-in-chief as well. But you know, this is just something we have to cope with. But it's you know, long term, the way we deal with it is we get more people on board and more resources. We don't shorten the process or make it. You know, you can be rest assured that the decisions we're making now are the same as the decisions we would have made, you know, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, colleagues at Irish Journal of Management, how are you handling this challenge?
Yeah, like Dermot, you know, the process hasn't changed in terms of the standards that are required or the reviewing process that's engaged in. So, you know, we welcome submissions, and, you know, obviously it's an issue in which people are trying to get published, and we hope that most things is that a rising tide lifts all boats, you know, that if we are going to get more contributions, that they are good contributions, and that's what we look for.
Sure, thank you. So at BJM, we, like other journals, we are also seeing a regular increase in our submissions, and we are still trying our best to deal the submissions within our existing team. It's not easy. So as editors of the journal, we try, as I said earlier, we try to handle number of submissions ourselves as well, and of course try to find a balance of how many manuscripts our associate editors are handling. But one thing is also becoming pretty clear, where given the large number of submissions, I believe all journals are trying hard to only allow high potential kind of submissions into the review process. Okay? Hence, you can see if someone does a quick analysis on the desk rejection rate, and we'll see continuously it is increasing. And it is increasing because, of course, the balance has to be fine related to workload, and editors also realize once an average kind of manuscript enters into the review process, most likely it might end up ticking majority of the boxes, but it will never become a great kind of high potential kind of publication. So hence, the one kind of approach which most journals are also pursuing is increasing the desk rejection rate, but also going for quality consistently and ensuring that kind of balance in the form of load of handling the manuscripts between the editorial team is also managed. Okay, so everyone, I think so, going back to the question, they are trying hard, working more and more. Number of hours put in are increasing, and it's important for scholars on the other side to understand, and I'll also plead to have patience at times, because we are handling more and more submissions. We are trying our best to be prompt, but going back to the earlier example, at times when we are trying to find those 3 reviewers, it's not easy. Many a times to find reviewers for one manuscript, we might be approaching 15, 16 different reviewers. And that's where at times a delay can take place. So that's our kind of take on how everyone is trying to handle the large number of submissions. Right, I can see 1 or 2 other kind of questions which is related to how do you handle bad reviewers and what can be done. I say, I'll start first, and then I'll let my fellow panelists to respond to this. Now and then it can happen where the intention is always to find the very best reviewer for a given submission. And of course, we have some guiding principles in the form of we know some names, in the form of we have these keywords to match the right kind of reviewer and so on. But now and then we'll be in that odd position where not necessarily the review is bad, perhaps it's short, perhaps they didn't highlight the positives of the manuscripts and did a very constructive kind of criticism, or didn't give clear kind of guidelines how to build and take the manuscript forward to improve quality and so on. So in that kind of rare occasions, we'll do a number of things. First, if we find perhaps it's not up to the mark, a particular review is not up to the mark, we might go back to the reviewer and ask them to provide more details. They may not, they may pull out. Or we might approach new set of reviewers and request them to do review. Or many a times, if we are pressed for time and we have exhausted our kind of possible approach to possible reviewers, then we might go back and reread the manuscript and try to make a judgment and see what some of the other more detailed and useful reviewers are saying, and then quickly make a decision. Okay. What will you say? How do you handle now and then when you find yourself in that kind of situation where the review you are expecting is not detailed or not the kind of review you are expecting for your journal?
Yeah, I can have a go at that first. Yeah, so I think thankfully it doesn't happen that often. You know, I know, you know, authors when they start out, they seem to put an awful lot of weight in the, you know, the things that a reviewer is writing. But remember, the reviewer is just one of three in the case of BJM and IGMR. And there's an editor there as well, a very experienced associate editor who will be, you know, have a lot of experience of dealing with different reviewers. So, you know, the first thing to note is a bad review. If it really is a bad review, i.e. a poorly constructed review, it probably won't have as much weight as you might think in terms of the decision that an editor's making. Now, if a review, as Pawan was saying, is not detailed enough, in other words, if the reviewer hasn't spent enough time, and often the reviewer is recommending accept, and that from an editor's point of view can be a bad review if you think the reviewer hasn't read the paper. So, you know, what we do in those cases is we would get a fourth reviewer, or in what we usually do in IGMR is rather than getting, if it happens later in the peer review processes, we'll ask someone from our editorial board who will have experience of dealing with a peer review in the journal to come in and give their opinion as well. So, you know, so our associate editors are well experienced in dealing with the process. And I would just, you know, when I first started out writing as well, and you get a very, very critical review, you know, remember that's only one of three different reviews that's been given, and the associate editor has a lot to do with how that judgment is made between those different reviews. So, you know, how one defines a bad review very much depends on their perspective. But you know, associate editors are usually very well experienced at dealing with this and finding solutions to it.
And thank you, Dermot. Someone else want to add to this?
Yeah, I think I would agree with the previous comments as well. I think it critically, as Dermot mentioned, I think it comes down to the handling editor, and in particular how they interpret and deal with such reviews. And again, I think that's some advice for when you're publishing is to read carefully the editor's decision letter as well. So I think, yeah, we definitely agree with previous comments on how we deal with that.
Thank you. I'm looking at the questions posed through the chat box, and I have picked up a couple of more questions. So the first one, I think so. It's not a straightforward answer. How long is the review process? Okay, and the take here is everyone. When I say everyone, all the editors, they try to do a very diligent job, and when they are doing that, they are taking your manuscript through a process of screening it themselves or handling it themselves, passing it on to the associate editors, and finding the right reviewers and so on. And if that happens as expected, everyone responds in time, and when it comes for you to respond to the reviewers' comments and so on. So accordingly, the time can be decided, but now and then we'll have these odd cases where we struggle to find the reviewers, or the first round of reviewers have pulled out, they are not taking part in the review process anymore. You might be forced to go to new reviewers and so on. So it's not easy to simply say that all journals or all submissions will go through and they will be allowed for publication in 9 months or 12 months and so on. each submission has its own journey, but it's important to understand that journey on which your submission will go. And also it's important to understand that there might be avenues where things might get delayed. And it's not because the editorial team is not pushing and is not serious and so on, but it can be because of other factors which are beyond their control. Okay. Okay, so the second question, which perhaps is more important and useful, I believe all the attendees would find that really useful, is related to contribution. Okay, so we indicated now and then we are looking for contribution to be made and so on. And historically, people have been talking about theoretical contribution or empirical contribution, and now and then conceptual contribution and so on. So can we please make a few comments how you editors see and decide that a given contribution is the one you are looking for? So how do you see contribution? What's your explanation and way of looking at contribution?
I will provide one example in relation to mergers and acquisitions, for example. Sometimes I'm receiving papers that are focusing on the impact of cultural differences in mergers and acquisitions, which is a very important factor, obviously, but overly explored at all possible layers: national culture distance, organizational culture, sectorial cultures, and so on. So it's very hard to bring about novelty in this particular area, unless someone goes and maybe focuses on other relatively underexplored topics like identification in mergers and acquisitions, or maybe, for example, recently, there is a growing area in general, the topic of presentism. So far, no one explored presentism in mergers and acquisitions. Of course, it's not enough by itself, but at least that opens up a potential contribution. What happens with people who are not going, who are not resigning after completion of mergers and acquisitions, but staying in the newly amalgamated entity, but are not contributing, not investing their time and energy? If properly designed, if properly collected primary data, maybe that paper has a chance to make a contribution.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, we are left with another 3 minutes. Someone else, can we go around?
Yeah,
one or two comments on contribution?
Oh, contribution, sorry.
Oops, I'll sign off, sir.
Dermot?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different strategies you can adopt to make a contribution. You know, at one end of the spectrum, there's sort of the gap spotting, and, you know, in terms of literature reviews, organizing a literature into things like antecedents and, you know, process and outcomes. And then at the other end, there are people that move outside a particular domain and sort of use metaphors and blend literatures and, you know, set out new paths. And really, as a journal, IGMR accepts all of these. But I would say that over the years, it's becoming increasingly difficult to get published with the sort of gap spotting contribution style. You know, journals look to increase their impact factor. You know, we get lots of submissions, and we, you know, so what we're looking for are increasingly papers that set out in more adventurous ways and make more interesting and impactful contributions. So that, you know, that's what I would say from our perspective.
Thank you. Doug, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So it's great that I followed Dermot because he said most of everything that I wanted to say. So now I have to think of something new. And so maybe I'll just tell you about my process is that when I get a new paper to look at, if it's directly in my area, then it's very easy for me to see the contribution because I've seen what's been impactful in the past. And I know exactly things that could be worked on, the quality of the data on different approaches that you might take. If it's not precisely in my area, the one thing that I will very frequently do is go to Google Scholar and I'll type in keywords related to your paper. And I'll immediately see if you've intentionally ignored citing relevant work, what else has been done in the area, who are the most cited people on this topic, and that'll allow me to get the best reviewers for the topic, and also it allows for, or at least it enables me to check for people that are trying to arbitrage across fields where they say, oh, this has been done in this area, but not in this area. And so then they don't properly cross-reference fields. So that's a very handy check. And I would encourage you before you submit your paper to do something similar. Go on to Google Scholar, type some keywords, see what happens when it comes up. And that'll allow you to make a real hard check and on yourself to say, does my paper say anything new?
Okay, I think so. I need to close it. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. We've been answering the queries here up until now. There are a number of open queries regarding, in particular, qualitative research. We'll acknowledge these. These can be answered and we'll distribute them after the event. Specifically, the queries are specific to qualitative research in the number of acceptable interviews and particular types of qualitative research in terms of the strategies from emerging and developing economies. So we're acknowledging that we have these questions and that we'll send a general response relating to qualitative research from the 3 journals.
Sure. So, George, you want to say anything before I close this?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating in this. We have been trying very, very hard throughout this webinar to answer your questions in the chat box. So sorry if we have not been able to answer every single one of them, but I do hope that that you found this a useful and productive event. There's only so much we can say in 90 minutes, but this has been really wonderful to have all these editors here with so much knowledge and so many insights. I think you got a better deal than if you went to a conference, I must say. So this has been a really great event. I just want to say thank you to everyone involved.
Okay. And can I just say a big thanks to colleagues who are in the back office who made this happen. So Luca and colleagues in the BAM office and Irish Academy of Management office who have worked so hard to put this together. And a big thanks to my co-panelists and Felicity and George for making this happen. I hope you guys found the information useful, and I believe all my fellow panelists will say best wishes for staying happy, healthy, safe, and keep pushing on your research agenda. We'll come back and give our responses to some of these questions which we couldn't do in the given 90 minutes. So at this stage, we have exhausted our time. So we'll stop here and thank you again, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.